Nice to see so many people. I wasn't expecting this kind of turn up. Actually, this is a defensive talk. So if you're looking for ownage, you probably want to be in there or over at the workshops. Okay, no one's leaving. Good. Nice. Okay, so this is a talk called Surviving 0 Days, Reducing the Window of Exposure. My name is Andreas Lindh. I come from a little place called Gothenburg in Sweden. So, the mandatory slide about me. I work as a security analyst and architect for a company called iSecure. We do a lot of security operations type stuff, so a lot of CM implementations and things like that. So I get to hang out with vendors a lot, and yeah. So professionally, I'm a defender. Unprofessionally, however, I do what everyone does. I dabble in security research, and you all know what that means, right? And I'm Adelind on Twitter. I'm pretty active, so if you want to speak to me about something, that's probably the best place to find me. Okay, so the TLDR. This talk is about software vulnerabilities in general, zero-day vulnerabilities in particular, and how the defense model that most enterprises, companies are using is kind of a legacy one, which doesn't really work anymore because the world has changed, defense hasn't. And I'm also going to propose like a methodology for becoming better at defense. And I'm mainly going to talk about client-side software because I think that's the attack space where we're actually not protecting in a very good way. Okay, so 0 days. I'm guessing you all know about 0 days, but I'm going to cover some basics anyway, just to get everyone on the same page. So a 0-day vulnerability is basically a software flaw that has no available fix, or at least no available fix to the root cause. And the only one who can provide this fix is basically the vendor. So you're pretty much in the hands of the vendor. And there's a lot of, unknown factors to the 0-day vulnerability. We don't know how many 0-day vulnerabilities that exists, for example. And this brings me to the window of exposure. I'm pretty sure you all know about this part too, but bear with me. So the window of exposure, when we talk about this, we're usually only talking about the timeline, like how long is the window of exposure. But there's actually another scale, which people are aware of it, we just don't discuss it. We're only talking about how can we reduce the timeline, how can we patch faster. So the timeline usually has 4 major checkpoints. It's the discovery, the disclosure, when the patch becomes available, and when the patch gets deployed. Now, these are not necessarily in chronological order. I mean, sometimes the patch becomes available at the same time that the disclosure is made, or sometimes there isn't a patch, sometimes there isn't a disclosure, even though you might call the patch in itself a disclosure. But it's a terminology thing, and I might be getting it wrong, actually. But anyway, my point is, so this is not in chronological order necessarily, but my point is that this part is totally out of our control. We don't know we can't do anything about that. We can't make the patch become available faster. And this part is in our control. Kind of, as you may notice, that arrow isn't green, which logically it should have been because the other one is red. But here's the thing, that this isn't really in our control. Theoretically, it is, but practically it isn't, and I'm getting back to that. And also, this part we don't even know about. I mean, we may be aware of a vulnerability for the first time when it's, I mean, when the patch arrives. Actually, this is usually the case. But someone knew about the vulnerability because someone found it, or maybe a couple of people found it independently of each other and chose to deal with it in different ways. And a lot of people doesn't think that this is a big deal because how often are 0 days actually being exploited before the patch is available? And Microsoft actually produced a report a while back called the Software Vulnerability Exploitation Trends, which showed that 46% of remote code execution vulnerabilities in Microsoft software during 2012 were actually exploited actively in the wild before a patch was available. And that's a pretty large number. So how do we usually protect against software vulnerabilities? Well, there's basically patching, which is the best way if you can, because it actually solves the root cause. Then you get virtual patching, which is stuff like IPS, for example, or web application firewalls, or even antivirus, who does the attacks signature thing. And this is basically just firewalling. You're filtering out attempts to exploit a vulnerability. And this sounds effective. This sounds effective. And then you can uninstall the software, which basically isn't protection, but it solves your problem. Uninstalling is usually not an option for a company, because companies run software for a reason. Home users just run software, just use it. So there's a difference there, and I'm getting to that. So how hard can it be? How hard can it be to actually patch? I mean, we're all getting these pop-ups on a regular basis. So you just press install updates and it's done. So why does it take so long for companies to patch? I mean, this is easy, right? But it turns out that it's pretty hard to do patching in a company. Like, if you considered that a company might have 20,000 clients or 60,000 clients, and a lot of, internal software that's not really built to be used by everyone, to work for every browser version, for every Java version, etc. So in a corporate environment, you need really tight control over what versions of software you're actually using. So as soon as a patch or an upgrade is available, patch management kicks in. So you got to do reference testing of applications that are using the software. And I mean, the people that are doing the testing, it's not really their main purpose at the company to be doing this testing. They got real work to do, so it often takes a while. Sometimes they come back to you and they say, well, this latest update broke our application, so we need to fix that before you can patch. So this can take like from a couple of weeks to months to years. And this is, I have a client who is running a certain web browser plugin, version 6, update 20, 2013. September. I mean, that's old. That's really, really, really old. And they can't patch. And they're working on it. They're constantly working on it. But it takes time sometimes. And I'm not saying that we should just, give up on trying to patch faster. I'm saying that we need to do other things too. I'm actually not saying to give up on anything. I'm saying to do more. So, and what if you can't patch? So what if someone who's doing the testing comes back to you and says like, I'm sorry, this update broke our system, and it's a legacy system. There's no documentation, and the guys who built it have left. Happens way more often than you'd imagine. Or it could be like a third-party system with an agreement that says that we update this software every 6 months, and you just got an update 2 weeks ago. Okay, so then you can choose to pay a lot of money for them to make an emergency upgrade. Pay a lot of money, you know how that goes, probably won't happen. And also, for some reason, some operations teams just don't have tools to patch the systems they're managing, which is crazy. This is a bullshit argument, but I hear it all the time. And this is weird. But that's a whole different problem. And then there's actually something else that kicks in once you can't patch. And that's H.D. Moore's law. I'm guessing that you all know who H.D. Moore is. But I think it was Josh Corman of Akamai who said at a B-Sides event earlier this year, I think, that what happens is that once an exploit becomes a Metasploit module, the number of potential attackers increase exponentially, because you don't need to be skilled in exploit development or in anything other than running backtrack, and you can just point and click. So it actually becomes very easy to exploit a vulnerability with Metasploit. So, and that makes not patching quite a serious issue. But okay, so what other defenses do we have? Well, most people got their defense in depth model. And I'm actually a big fan of defense in depth as a concept. And the idea is that if the first layer of protection doesn't catch an attack, maybe the second layer will, or the third layer will, etc. So this is a good concept, but it's really, really, really abstract. And when people, turn this concept into an implementation, a long, long, long time ago, because this concept has been around forever. It's not really an IT or information security concept. I think it's a military thing from the beginning. But when this concept was turned into an implementation forever ago, it looked something like this. And this was probably good enough back then, but there's a lot of other things going on too. This is like a gross generalization, but when it comes to protecting against software vulnerabilities, this is basically it. This is what companies are using. And this is a VCO picture. I haven't actually done this because I don't have Visio. But if you Google for defense in depth, this is what you find. So that's actually pretty funny. And I mean, so if we're looking at this, I mean, I can see like 4 layers if I'm really generous, but the antivirus and the host IPS are probably the same thing because it's an endpoint protection suite of some kind. So we got 3 layers then. Let's assume that the firewall is one of these really cool next generation firewalls who does dynamic content inspection and so on. So is this really a problem then? I mean, we've got the layers, right? Okay, so here's the thing. All of these things can be bypassed. Attackers have been bypassing this for a long time. Since the implementation has pretty much been the same the whole time. Attackers have had pretty much training on how to evade them. There's also the fact that there's a pretty small chance that either of these will catch something they haven't seen earlier, like an unknown vulnerability, a 0-day. So, okay. And then this whole model assumes that what it's protecting is on a corporate network, because it has to be in front of it. And you know what's happened, not recently, a long time ago actually, is that everyone's using a laptop, right? So when you leave work, you bring your laptop, and then you go to and use the free Wi-Fi over at Starbucks, or you have a mobile broadband dongle, or you have an internet connection at home. Pretty sure you don't have the IPS at home. Or okay, some people in here probably do, but you're all crazy, right? And so that actually bypasses the 2 layers from the last picture, which leaves us with antivirus as our only line of defense. This isn't really true because operating systems actually do security things too, but they protect the operating system. They don't give a crap about the other stuff that's installed a lot of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. And also, attackers have actually become better at bypassing security controls because they get better all the time. We as defenders haven't really gotten better. Our blinky boxes have gotten more expensive and probably better, but that doesn't matter because they're installed in some kind of default mode to not interrupt the business. So no one's really using the tools that well anyway. So what does this mean? Well, it leaves us with this. It's a pretty uneven fight. It's 1 guy against 4 tanks. Or it's actually 1 girl against 4 tanks, I think. And so, I mean, this is not a good situation, I'd say, right? This is actually a pretty bad situation. And this is not really news either. I think most of us are aware that the situation is like this. So are we on it? Are we doing something about it? Are we working on it? Well, yes. I mean, I'm here, so obviously someone is, and I'm sure a lot of you are too. But here's the thing, and I'm gonna quote a guy called Dan Kaminsky. So, N people want to fix security holes. 10 times N people want to exploit security holes. And 100,000 times N want Tetris. So the 100,000 times N, that's ordinary people who don't care about security. The 10 times N people are breakers, and I'm a big fan of breaking. Breaking is fun, like Harun said, breaking is sexy. It really is. It's fun. It's more fun to tweet, I exploited this, than to, I protected this. And this kind of makes, you know, the whole InfoSec echo chamber pretty one-sided, because no one is talking about defense. And the N people who might be talking about defense, who might be talking about actually fixing things, they get lost in the flood of, this is my proof of concept exploit code for the latest Java sandbox bypass, or all the mailing lists that are actually only talking about the vulnerability, how it works, not what can we do to mitigate it. No one's talking about that at all. And I think we kind of need to change that a bit, because people are actually looking to the information security community for advice, and it's pretty hard to find. It's pretty easy to find advice on how to exploit vulnerabilities. Pretty hard to find the opposite. So, another quote. This is like the best tweet I've ever seen when it comes to security. That is, this is awesome. And I think we should all adapt this a bit. Also, I want to point out here that the 10 times N people might actually also be the N people, because of course you can be both the breaker and the builder. That would be the best thing, actually, because if you know how to break something, you probably have an idea on how to fix it too. Okay, so what can we do? Is there anything we can do? So this is my proposal for a methodology to raise the security baseline, like where I feel that it matters, where it could actually make a difference. So I might be way off here, so you might not agree with me at all, and please tell me so I can learn stuff or kick your ass or whatever. So what's the problem? The problem we're facing is that we're over-reliant on patching, and we've got a very much perimeter-focused defense model. We're relying very heavily on the network to do our protection. And as I've said, maybe doesn't work that well anymore. So what are we going to do? Are we going to firewall all the things? Like this guy, looks really secure. So we need to figure out where we're going to do protection. So where can we do it so that it actually counts? And traditionally, when we talk about this, we always end up talking about stuff like data classification and segmentation, etc. And that's good too, but you're kind of forgetting the layer who has access to all the data, and that's the user. So once you compromise the user, you basically just need to find the right user who has access to the data you need, and then you use that user as a proxy. So that's not going to work 100%. So my proposal is that we focus on the software instead. We don't do it the old-fashioned way. And this is kind of like a hardening process. Hardening, a lot of people do that, but it's basically done on a system level. You're not really hardening the software. So that's what I'm proposing, that you're starting with the software that you're actually afraid of vulnerabilities in. So some things to consider here is exposure. What is the software exposed to? Is it exposed directly to the big bad internet without any filtering going on? Well, you probably want to protect that, right? You get the likelihood of it being attacked. Like, for example, there's a pretty big chance that if you're running Java, Java is going to be attacked. There was an incident this January, I think. There were 3 incidents, and in February, 3 pretty big players came out and said we've been breached. It was Facebook, Apple, and Twitter. Not sure if Twitter has actually confirmed that it was Java, but what?
Which attack?
The one in,
The watering hole attack?
yeah.
December of last year?
Oh, it was December, yeah.
Yeah, it was Java.
Yeah, and so that was actually, I mean, I think we're all aware of that Java is probably, you know, attacks on Java aren't going to stop. 0 days in Java are going to keep coming for a while. So, you know, that makes that a pretty likely target for an attack that. And you've also got the history, like Java has a really bad history, so that's also something to consider. And also, how prepared are you to actually handle patching this software? Like my client, who's running the really old version of an unnamed web browser plugin, they're not very prepared to patch that because they can't at the moment, or they're saying that they can. So that's basically how you choose what to protect. You could probably do a lot more too, but that's some things. And then you get to the first phase, which is the build phase. And the build phase is meant to raise the security baseline, focusing on certain software, and by doing hardening on them. And this is done kind of generically, because in this phase we don't know what we're protecting against. We're just assuming that this software is vulnerable. This software has all kinds of security holes. What?
It is all vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. If history has shown us anything, that everything is vulnerable all the time. Vulnerabilities doesn't sleep. So, how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to be proactive, as I said. We're going to do it without really knowing about the vulnerabilities. And that sounds kind of, you know, how do we do that? But I'm getting to that part. So, and we're going to do it from the inside and out, because most of our protections today are on the network level. So if we shouldn't really be focusing on that part first. We should be focusing on doing stuff closer to the actual software. And we're going to do it onion style, of course, layer upon layer upon layer. And if possible, we should make these implementations reusable, because if I come up with a really good protection for something, and you have similar software too that works in pretty much the same way, there's a chance you'll be able to just apply the same things there too. So that makes the scope of it wider, so to speak. Okay, so let's have a look at an example. This is an onion for those of you who don't know that. So I thought that would be a fitting example. So you could basically, you start with the software that's in the middle of it. So sandboxing could be a good idea. It doesn't always work, but it could be a good idea. A lot of software uses their own native sandbox, but a lot of exploits for those softwares focusing on bypassing the sandbox. So if you could add another sandbox, would be great. You can use like the built-in operating system features like ASLR, DEP, C-hop. These are existing in most modern operating systems, but are not necessarily activated for all the software, especially the software that is not coming from the vendor of the operating system. So you could try to activate that. You could use like the Microsoft EMET framework, which is good, I think. You could use stuff like the software restriction policy, which says under which circumstances is this code allowed to execute, for example. And you can look at what the software, the intermediary channels into the software is. Like if you have a business process where people are receiving PDFs over email from the outside, and you've got, you know, you got your IPS and you got your, maybe you got like FireEye or something doing inspection on your email, but then you got like an instant messaging service where you can talk to people on the outside and receive files. You've actually got less protection that way than you do the other way. So maybe you could shore up that. You could do stuff like application whitelisting. Doesn't really protect the software. So now we've actually left the focusing on the software part and, you know, doing more generic hardening, because it will probably be pretty impossible for us to choose what software to protect and not miss something. So it's pretty good if we can, you know, widen the scope as we go along. And the further away from the core you get, the more generic and less software focused you're going to be. And then you get your, you know, like endpoint protection and IPS. And that's, you know, stuff that we already have, but could probably be made to work a little better, be more efficient. Like if you're not doing SSL inspection in your IPS, maybe you should consider that. So pros and cons about this. Well, it's gonna improve the security baseline for the system. It's gonna reduce the impact of a successful attack, because you'll be able to do some sort of containment. And it's proactive, so you're doing it now. And actually, like people like Microsoft are actually, you know, doing it the proactive way with Windows, because they're like building defenses against vulnerabilities that they don't know about. And I think this is a really good approach, actually. And the cons, it's generic. You're gonna miss things. There's gonna be holes that you couldn't fill. And it's gonna add a lot of complexity to your systems. And operations doesn't really approve of this. So that might be tough. So that was step number 1. So step number 2 is like a complement, and that's the React phase. You don't need to react this exact way, but I think this is a good picture of a reaction. I've actually gotten Wim Remme's approval to use this picture, which is good, I think. So, okay, so what do I mean by React? Well, this is actually fairly obvious, but not a lot of people are doing it. So you get an incident timeline, usually that looks something like this. Okay, there's the 0 day, it's disclosed, it's out there. After a while, there's an incident. The incident responders come, and then you patch it eventually, hopefully. Might be more than one incident, but the thing is that very few people are doing any sort of reacting before the incident. The incident is what triggers the reaction, and then you do incident response, which is very important, but it actually, something has already happened. You can monitor the network for ongoing things and actually stop an incident before it happens too, but from what I've seen, that rarely happens. And so my idea, and as I said, this is fairly obvious, we do what Bob the Builder says, and react earlier. And so by reacting earlier and by having done the build phase, we can actually plug the holes that we were missing from the build phase, because now we know that, okay, this is the vulnerability. We can analyze it. This is how it works. Will what we have done earlier stop it or mitigate it? Can we do more? Can we do more specific stuff focused on this vulnerability? So, but we got to do it fast, because people are gonna exploit it, or people might exploit it. And what we can't do fast, we can use as input to number one, because you didn't consider this scenario in one. Okay, we do it again. Then we take that as input and like, oh, that can happen. This kind of vulnerability. Okay, we didn't think about that, so we'll just, we'll just add that to our list of things to do in the hardening phase. Okay, so pros and cons about this. Well, it's vulnerability specific. We know what to focus on, which makes us able to use it as a complement to number one. It will also, keep our defenses current, because we're gonna have like a connection to the real world, which we kind of didn't have in step number one. Step number one was just protect in general. And the cons is that, well, we've got a very limited time. You got to do it fast, and it's reactive. We can't do anything before we actually know about it. So that's basically the cons about it. But together, I feel that this could be a pretty powerful approach. It's going to take a lot more work. This is very high level, and as I said, I might be way off. So to wrap it up, patching takes a lot of time. It does. It could be done much faster than most people are doing it, but it takes a lot of time. And you can't patch what you don't know about. So there's a hole right there. And the traditional controls, our defense model, it's not really working. It's not enough. We got to do more, I think. So let's build. Let's build layers. Maybe not that many layers, but yeah, you get my point, right? Okay, so I hope I've made some sense. This was my first talk ever, so fair bit nervous. Thank you for listening. Q&A. Yep, Ange.
Layers? Oh, sorry.
Oh, great.
Hello. Yeah. Doesn't adding many layers also add some kind of complexity by obscurity, which means then people feel more secure because they have more layers, but actually no one is able to control and to know what's happening in the layers, and then you see what I mean? So
Yeah. That's definitely a risk. I agree. While I would like us to do more, I don't want us to do too much either. So it's a fine line. Very much so. Anyone else? You're not all agreeing with me, are you? Come on. Call me out. Okay, thank you.